People like you don't buy cars like this. People like you just look. Said out loud, in a room full of people, to a woman who could have written a check and bought every car on that floor, and still had money left to buy the building. Nobody in that showroom knew that. They also didn't know she was the reason a young man named Danny was still alive. And the man who laughed at her? He was Danny's brother. If you've ever been sized up before you had a single chance to say a word, this story is for you. Eleanor Bennett was 30 years old, and she had built her entire life around one belief that a person's worth had nothing to do with what they wore. She hadn't arrived at that belief easily. At 19, she'd sat on a cracked linoleum floor in a Boston apartment so cold she could see her own breath, eating instant noodles from a foam cup, telling herself that someday none of this would define her. She was right, but the memory of it? That she kept on purpose. She was founder and chairwoman of the Bennett Foundation, $68 million raised, more than 4,000 children with disabilities supported across New England, surgeries funded quietly, without press releases, without recognition. She was also, on this particular October morning, a woman in worn jeans and a white t-shirt with a very specific errand. Her sister's birthday was in 2 days. The sky was the color of an old pewter mixing bowl. That particular New England October shade that smells like wood smoke and means winter is 3 weeks behind it. Eleanor parked her 10-year-old Honda Civic 2 blocks away on Marlborough Street and walked. Faded sneakers, brown hair in a ponytail, worn jeans with a small fray above the right knee, a thin jacket she'd owned for 6 years. Around her neck, a simple silver chain her sister had pressed into her hand the year they arrived in America with almost nothing. She wore it every day, not for show, for memory. She touched it once before pushing through the glass door. Boston Luxury Motors on Commonwealth Avenue was designed to make certain people feel like they didn't belong. Marble floors cold as a church in January. Luxury cars under individual spotlights like museum pieces. And in the center of the room, under a single warm beam, the midnight blue Porsche 911 Turbo S Coupe. Eleanor stopped. She looked at it the way you look at something you've already decided on. A young salesman named Lucas, 25, earnest face, suit slightly too big in the shoulders, started toward her. He was halfway across the floor when a louder set of footsteps cut him off. Travis Langston looked Eleanor up and down the way you glance at something at a yard sale, already decided. "Can I help you?" Polite words, not a polite tone. Eleanor smiled.
"Hello, I'd like to look at the midnight blue Porsche. I want to buy it as a birthday gift for my sister. She just finished 2 years of cancer treatment. She came through." One beat of silence. Then Travis laughed, the kind designed to fill a room. 2 salesmen glanced over. A customer near the Bentley smiled. "That car is $285,000. People in your situation usually just browse." A tilt of his head. "The used lot is 3 blocks that way." Someone snorted. The Bentley customer shook his head, amused. Eleanor's face went still. A flush moved across her cheeks. Not anger, recognition. She had stood in this moment before. "I understand," she said quietly. "Thank you." She turned toward the exit, and that's when the necklace slipped. It fell to the marble with the smallest sound. Travis picked it up, turned it once. Lucas stepped forward. "Mr. Travis, I'll return that to her." Travis set it on the nearest surface without looking. "Leave it. Cheap thing. Suits her." Lucas picked it up and caught Eleanor on the front steps. He pressed it into her hand without a word. She closed her fingers around it and looked at him with an expression he would think about for a long time. "Thank you," she said. Then she was gone. Lucas stood on those steps, holding whatever she'd whispered to him. Just 4 or 5 words. Like a stone he hadn't expected to be carrying. Behind him, Travis was already telling the story to a customer. Entertained. Easy. Like the best part of his morning.
He had no idea what was coming. Do you think Eleanor should have dressed differently, just to be treated with respect? Type 1 for yes. Type 2 for no. Because what she does next, and why she does it exactly this way, will change how you see this entire story. She went home and made herself a cup of tea. Chamomile, the kind in the yellow box on the second shelf, the one she always reached for when she needed to think instead of react. She sat at the kitchen table with both hands around the mug, and she did not spiral. She thought about her sister instead, her sister Lon, who had slept beside her on a pull-out couch through 3 Boston winters when the radiator only worked half the time. Lon, who had saved for a full month to buy Eleanor a warm coat from a thrift shop and wrapped it in the Sunday comics because proper gift wrap was a luxury. Lan, who had called Eleanor from the hospital the afternoon of her diagnosis and said, before anything else, "Don't come yet. Let me get myself together first," as if she needed to be presentable in order to receive devastating news. Eleanor set down her mug, looked at the necklace resting on the table beside it. Lan had given her that necklace 14 years ago. A simple silver chain. Nothing expensive. Nothing that would turn a head in a room. But Eleanor had worn it every day since. The way a grandmother keeps her mother's old apron on the hook even after the apron has long since retired from actual cooking. Not for display, for remembering. She was going to buy that car, not out of spite, not to prove anything to a man she barely knew, because Lon had once pressed her nose against a dealership window in December with no money and no plan, and pointed at a blue Porsche and said, "Someday, little sister." She had never said it again, but Eleanor had filed it away in that part of her memory reserved for promises she made to herself. Someday was in 2 days. That same afternoon, Eleanor returned to Boston Luxury Motors. Same jeans, same white t-shirt, same sneakers, same necklace. Now back in its place, she pushed through the glass door and stepped onto the cold marble floor. Travis spotted her from across the room before she had taken 3 steps. His expression didn't shift to surprise. It shifted to something harder. The particular irritation of a man who believed he had already handled a situation. He crossed the floor in long strides and stopped squarely in her path. "We require appointments," he said. Not a sentence. A wall. "You need to leave." Eleanor held her ground. "I'd like to speak with someone about purchasing the Porsche." But then the front door opened again. Travis's entire energy pivoted like a compass needle finding north. The Harringtons had arrived. His suit was pressed charcoal. Her heels struck the marble in a precise, confident rhythm. Travis stepped around Eleanor as if she had already dissolved and extended both hands toward the couple.
his smile arriving from somewhere much warmer than anything he'd offered Eleanor. "Mr. and Mrs. Harrington, welcome. Right this way." He led them directly to the midnight blue Porsche, Eleanor's car, with the ease of a man who owned the floor he walked on. Mrs. Harrington lowered herself into the driver's seat and ran her fingertips along the stitched leather, slow and satisfied. Travis spread his hands. A car like this belongs to a very specific kind of person. Eleanor stepped forward calmly. "I'm prepared to purchase it today, for my sister's birthday." Travis turned around. What happened next was not an accident, it was a performance. And he knew it. And he wanted the audience. Cash? He spread the word across the showroom like he was reading it off a marquee. "Ma'am, this is not a swap meet." He gestured at her broadly, top to bottom, the full sweep of it, while several nearby customers turned to look. People who spend close to $300,000 on a car do not show up in worn jeans and a t-shirt off the clearance rack. The laughter came. Not universal, but enough. One woman covered her mouth. A salesman near the back wall looked at the ceiling. Victor Langford materialized in the doorway of his office, broad-shouldered, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, taking in the scene with the unhurried air of a man reviewing a report. He held Travis's gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once, slow and deliberate, and returned to his office. That nod was its own kind of sentence. Eleanor stood in the center of that marble floor. Her heart was striking hard against her ribs. Her face was warm, but her posture did not change. Her chin did not drop. She did not look for the exit. She had been in rooms that tried to shrink her before. She was still standing. She turned to Lucas, who had not laughed, who had not looked at the ceiling, who was standing near the edge of the showroom with his jaw tight and his hands very still at his sides. "Thank you," she said, quietly enough that only he could hear. "You are the only person in this building who has looked at me like a human being." Then she leaned slightly closer and said something to him, a handful of words, low and private. Lucas went completely still. His eyes moved to her face and stayed there. Eleanor walked out. Lucas found Travis a few minutes later in the back hallway near the coffee station. "Mr. Travis," he kept his voice measured, "I don't think she is who you think she is." Travis poured himself a cup without turning around. "You're new, so I'll explain something to you. I'm just saying, I got let go from a good job once." Travis picked up his mug and finally turned. "The owner called me in. Took one look at the blazer I'd worn every day for 2 years and decided I wasn't the image he needed anymore. Didn't ask a single question first, just looked. Something behind his eyes had gone flat and old. So yes, I know exactly what wealthy people think of people like us the moment we walk in. I learned that lesson firsthand." He walked past Lucas without waiting for a response. Lucas stood alone in the hallway. He reached into his jacket pocket and took out the small notepad he kept there. He looked at what Eleanor had written on the top line. He read it twice. Then he put the notepad away and went back to work. When Eleanor arrived home that evening, Julian was in the kitchen in his work shirt, warming up leftover soup on the stove. He turned when she came in, and whatever he read in her face made him set the ladle down and cross the kitchen without a word. She told him everything, not in a rush, carefully, in the order it happened. The way you recount something you want a trusted person to fully understand.
By the time she finished, the soup had gone cold, and Julian's jaw was set in a way she recognized. "Eleanor, please don't escalate it." She put a hand flat on his chest. "I just want to get Lon her birthday present. That is the entire story." Julian was quiet for a moment. "You know what I've never understood?" she said then, stepping back and picking up her tea mug. "People assume that because I could walk in there wearing whatever I wanted, because I could afford to, that means I should, that I owe it to the room to prove myself before they'll treat me with basic decency." She shook her head slowly. "I wear these clothes because I need to remember. I need to remember what it felt like to be judged before I opened my mouth. Because the moment I forget that feeling is the moment I stop understanding the people I built the foundation to serve." Julian watched her for a long moment. 48 hours, he said finally. She nodded. "Then I'm going with you," he said. Something in the way he said it. Quiet. Settled. Finished. Told Eleanor that a decision had already been made. She just didn't yet know the shape it would take. The next morning, 48 hours before her sister's birthday, Travis Langston stood in the center of that showroom and told his favorite news story to a laughing audience, completely unaware that something was about to pull into the lot that would end the story permanently. Travis arrived 40 minutes early and in a good mood. He had told the story at dinner. The woman in the jeans, the cash offer, his brother-in-law nearly choked on a breadstick. He'd told it again at the coffee station that morning, refining the timing slightly, the way a story improves with repetition. By 9 o'clock, he had a loose audience near the Bentley. "Yesterday," he said, easy and unhurried, "a woman dressed like she came off the set of a yard sale tried to walk in here and buy a Porsche. I had her out the door in under a minute." The showroom laughed. He didn't notice his phone had 3 unread messages from Victor. He didn't notice Lucas standing very still at the reception desk, watching the front glass. But everyone else noticed the light change. It pulled to a stop on Commonwealth Avenue like something from a different atmosphere entirely. A custom midnight blue Rolls-Royce Phantom extended wheelbase. The kind of car that doesn't arrive with noise. It simply appears, and the space around it adjusts. Every conversation in the showroom stopped mid-sentence. The rear door opened. The man who stepped out was tall, unhurried, in a dark suit the color of strong coffee. He stood on the sidewalk for just a moment, not performing patience, actually possessing it. Then he pushed through the glass door. Travis moved on instinct. His whole body recognized money the way a compass needle finds north. "Welcome to Boston Luxury Motors. What can I show you today?" The man looked at him with the calm expression of someone who has already read the last page. "I'm here regarding the midnight blue Porsche 911, the one my wife was hoping to purchase." Travis held the smile. "Your wife, sir?" "Eleanor Bennett." One sentence, placed on the marble floor between them like a deed. Travis's smile didn't fall. It simply stopped, the way a clock stops. Julian Bennett did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Eleanor Bennett, his wife, founder and chairwoman of the Bennett Foundation. $68 million raised over 12 years. Direct support to more than 4,000 children with disabilities across New England. Speech therapy, adaptive technology, physical rehabilitation, life-altering surgeries. Funded anonymously, without a single press release. The showroom was so quiet, the ventilation system in the ceiling was audible. Victor Langford appeared in his office doorway. The color had left his face entirely. Julian continued, quiet, level, but carrying the way a low note on a piano carries, felt more than heard. My wife dresses simply every day by choice. She came from very little, and she never wanted comfort to insulate her from understanding what it feels like to be dismissed before saying a word. He held Travis's gaze. She believes a person's value is not determined by what they wear. It is determined by how they treat others, particularly those who have nothing to offer them. Travis opened his mouth, closed it. I didn't know who she was, he said, smaller than he'd intended. That is precisely the point, Julian said. One more thing, said slowly. When Eleanor was starting out in this city, she was turned away from a job interview at a Cambridge cafe. The manager looked at her coat and said, "We need someone more presentable." He didn't ask her a single question first. A pause. She walked home in November rain and made herself a promise that she would spend the rest of her life making sure no one else ever stood in a doorway feeling what she felt that afternoon. The room absorbed this. Travis stood very still. His hands, usually restless, had gone quiet at his sides. Then, from the far edge of the showroom, Lucas spoke, low, aimed at the salesman beside him. 3 years ago, Eleanor's foundation covered the full cost of emergency heart surgery for Travis's younger brother. His name is Danny. He was 22. No insurance, no way to pay. The grant came through anonymously. He folded his notepad. Travis never knew where it came from. The salesman beside Lucas stared at him. Travis was close enough to catch none of the exact words, but he saw the other man's face, that specific look of someone who has just understood the size of something. And it landed on him like a hand on the shoulder in the dark. He didn't know what had been said, but the quality of the silence around him had changed. His throat moved. He swallowed. Victor stepped forward. Composure partially reconstructed. Mr. Bennett, I want to assure you that what occurred here does not represent the standards. I have a clear picture of the standards of this dealership, Julian said. He didn't look at Victor when he said it. He looked at Travis. My wife came in twice to buy a birthday gift for her sister, who spent 2 years in cancer treatment. That is the full context. He let that settle. The Foundation's gala is in 3 days. We had planned to purchase 9 vehicles for our children's transportation program. $4.2 million. A pause. That plan is currently on hold. Victor's hand found the doorframe. Julian turned to Lucas. I'll leave the Porsche transaction in your hands. And just like that, Lucas Bennett, 25 years old, slightly oversized jacket, small notepad in his breast pocket, stepped forward and took the deal, right past Travis, who stood exactly where he was, with nothing left to perform and no audience left to perform it for. But the conditions Julian set the following morning would send Travis somewhere he never expected, and what he found when he arrived there would quietly break open something that humiliation alone never could have reached. The conditions arrived the following morning in the form of a registered letter delivered to Boston Luxury Motors before the doors opened. Julian's attorney had drafted it. 3 pages, clean and precise. No rhetorical flourish. No room for interpretation.
Travis Langston would serve 45 days as a full-time, unpaid volunteer at the Bennett Foundation. Not a financial contribution, not a letter of apology published in a company newsletter. 45 days on the floor, working directly alongside program staff, assisting children with disabilities in their daily activities, adaptive recreation, speech sessions, physical therapy exercises, all of it. Boston Luxury Motors would host a company-wide unconscious bias training seminar, mandatory for every employee from the sales floor to the back office. Eleanor Bennett would serve as the keynote speaker. The showroom security footage from the past 2 days, audio and video, capturing every exchange in full, would be retained. If either condition was declined, Julian would provide copies to 3 Boston television stations and release it across social media by end of business Friday. Victor Langford read the letter standing at his desk. He read it again. Then he sat down. Travis read it standing in the hallway outside Victor's office. He read it once. "This is not a negotiation," he said flatly, to no one in particular. "No," Victor said from inside, "it is not." Travis stood in the hallway with the letter in his hand. His jaw was tight. Everything in him resisted. Not the public consequence, which he could have weathered with anger, but the particular intimacy of the demand. 45 days in a building full of children he would have to look in the eye. No performance, no script, no audience he could win over. He walked back into Victor's office and set the letter on the desk. "I'll do it," he said. Then, under his breath, barely a sound at all, "But it won't change me." Victor suspended him from sales duties that same evening, pending review. That was how it was phrased. Travis collected his jacket, walked through the showroom without making eye contact with anyone, and pushed through the glass door onto Commonwealth Avenue. The October air was cold and direct. He sat in his car without starting the engine. The city moved around him. A city bus, a couple with coffee cups, someone's small dog pulling hard against its leash toward a fire hydrant. None of it registered. He felt the way a piece of furniture feels when it's been moved into the wrong room. Present, out of place, waiting for something to make sense. He told himself he was angry. He was. Genuinely. The situation felt like a system rigged against him. A billionaire with lawyers and footage and moral authority on his side. And Travis, with nothing but a job he no longer had and a story he could no longer tell. It was deeply unfair. He was certain of it. But underneath the anger, running cold and quiet like groundwater, was something else. Something he didn't have a name for yet. He drove to Tremont Street. He told himself the purpose was practical. He would go to the foundation office, speak with someone on staff, get clarity on the logistics of the arrangement before it began, set a professional tone from the outset. He would not walk in 45 days from now like a man who had been broken. He would walk in like a man who had made a choice. He parked on the street. The building was a converted brownstone, 3 stories, warm light in most of the windows. A small hand-lettered sign beside the front door read, in plain black letters, Bennett Foundation, Children's Programs. The door was unlocked. Evening community programming still running, and Travis stepped into the front hallway. The reception area was quiet, overhead lights off, just the glow from a side lamp. The corridor beyond it was dim. And then he heard it.
through the partially open door at the far end of the hall, crying. Not the kind that fills a room, the private kind. The kind that happens when a person believes the building is empty and they finally let themselves stop holding on. Travis had heard that sound exactly once before in his life, through a hospital room door, and the memory of it arrived now without warning. He moved toward the door without deciding to. Quietly. He stopped when he could see through the gap. Eleanor was at her desk, alone. The office lights were off. The only illumination came from the hallway behind Travis and from the soft glow of her phone, lying face up on the desk, beside a photograph she was holding in both hands. The careful way you hold something old, or fragile, or irreplaceable. She was looking at the photograph. After a moment, very quietly, in a voice with no audience and no performance in it at all, she spoke. "I still get afraid," she said. "Even now, even with everything, I still walk into rooms and wait for someone to tell me I don't belong." A slow breath. "I don't know if that ever fully goes away." Travis did not move. He stood in the hallway of the Bennett Foundation on Tremont Street, and he looked at Eleanor Bennett, the woman he had pointed at, laughed at, turned into a punchline over a dinner table. And for the first time, he did not see the woman who had won the argument. He saw someone who had been carrying a wound for a very long time. Someone who, despite everything, had never fully put it down. He thought about his brother Danny, 22 years old and gray-faced in a hospital bed. The particular gray of someone whose body is losing an argument. The surgery that should have cost $78,000 that Danny had somehow, miraculously, been fully covered for through a foundation grant. Travis had assumed it was a government program. He had signed the paperwork and moved forward and never looked further into it, because looking further into good luck felt like testing it. He thought now about the look on the salesman's face in the showroom. That specific expression of someone who has just learned the size of something. Travis stepped back from the door without making a sound. He walked down the corridor, through the lobby, down the front steps, and back into the cold night air of Tremont Street. He sat in his car for a long time. When he finally drove home, he did not turn on the radio. He did not call anyone. He drove through the dark streets with his hands on the wheel and his eyes on the road. And he thought about a woman sitting alone in a dark office, holding a photograph, whispering something that was never meant to be heard. He thought about the story he had told at dinner. He did not sleep well that night. In 3 days, Travis Langston would walk into the most important room of his life. Not a car showroom, not a corporate office, but a ballroom full of the children and families that Eleanor had built her entire life around serving. And what he chose to do on that stage, with no script and no warning, would be the truest thing he had done in years. The Fairmont Copley Plaza Hotel on St. James Avenue has stood at the edge of Copley Square since 1912. In that time, it has hosted presidents and war-era fundraisers and enough milestone evenings to fill a very thick archive. Its grand ballroom has ceilings the color of old cream and chandeliers the size of small boats. and on the evening of the Bennett Foundation annual gala. Every table was full, 400 people, flowers in tall vases, the layered sound of conversations building over each other like weather moving in from the harbor. Travis stood near the back wall in a volunteer uniform, navy polo, khaki slacks, a laminate badge on a plastic clip. He had arrived at 6 that morning, not because the schedule required it, because a staff member named Carol had called him at 5:55 and said that Thomas's transport van had come early, and Thomas had already asked twice whether Travis was going to be there. Thomas was 8 years old. He had been born with partial paralysis below the waist. He used a custom wheelchair for most activities and a floor mat for his adaptive exercises. And he possessed a laugh that arrived slightly before the joke. A laugh that reorganized the air in whatever room it entered. He had started calling Travis T-Man on the 3rd day of volunteer work. Travis hadn't known what to do with the nickname, so he had said nothing. Thomas had taken the silence as confirmation. By the 3rd week, Travis had quietly begun showing up before he was scheduled. He examined this fact briefly one morning while making coffee, and then decided not to examine it further. Tonight, in the ballroom, Travis was helping Thomas run an adaptive basketball drill. Lower hoop, court lines taped in orange on the parquet floor, while the room filled around them. Thomas took a shot. The ball dropped clean through the net. He threw both arms straight up.
T-Man, did you see it?
I saw it.
Were you actually watching, though? You have to be actually watching.
Thomas, I was watching. The grin that followed was wide enough to close his eyes. Again, he said, and held out both hands for the ball. Travis set it in his palms. From the stage, Eleanor caught sight of them for just a moment before the program director guided her toward the podium. She was wearing a simple navy dress, no jewelry beyond the silver necklace, her hair down. She looked exactly like herself. She had spent some time that afternoon in front of the mirror making sure of that. This was the whole point of tonight, of every night really, not to become someone else in a beautiful room, just to be herself, clearly and without apology, in front of as many people as possible. The room settled. She stood at the podium and looked out at 400 faces, donors and program families and Boston city officials, and a small cluster of journalists with press lanyards. And she did what she always did before speaking in a room like this. She remembered being 19, the coat with the button sewn over the burn mark on the cuff, the Cambridge Cafe, the manager who had looked at her for 3 seconds and said, "We need someone more presentable," and turned away. She remembered walking home in November rain and sitting down on the front steps of her apartment building because her legs had simply stopped cooperating, pressing her face into her cold hands. She remembered making a promise. Then she lifted her eyes to the room, and she began. 12 years ago, she said, I was a college student working part-time to stay enrolled. I lost that job because my manager decided I didn't represent the image of the establishment. He didn't ask me a single question first. She touched the necklace at her throat. I was wearing a coat with a button where a burn mark used to be. The ballroom was very still. I did not start this foundation only to serve others. I started it because I needed to remind myself, every single day, that kindness is a decision. It is not a reward for people who have earned it. It is not a benefit reserved for those who look the part. She glanced down briefly, then back up. It is a choice available to every one of us, at any moment, at no cost whatsoever. She paused.
My sister received a beautiful gift for her birthday this year. The faintest smile moved across her face. She cried in her pajamas in the driveway at 11 o'clock at night, which was exactly right. A soft wave of laughter moved through the room. But the moment I am most grateful for this week is not the car. It is standing here, in this room, surrounded by the children and families who remind me every single day why any of this matters. She looked toward the back of the room, toward Thomas and the orange tape and the lowered hoop. A person's worth has never been in their clothes, their vehicle, their address, or any surface thing. It is in the way they live, the way they give, and the way they choose to treat others, especially when there is absolutely nothing to be gained from kindness except the practice of it. She let the sentence land. The world is full of people dismissed the moment they walk through a door, and it is full of people with the power to either add to that dismissal or to interrupt it. Her voice was steady and quiet and reached the back wall without effort. I believe that most of us, given a clear moment of choice, will choose to interrupt it. The silence lasted 2 full seconds. Then the applause began. One person, then a ripple, then the whole room rising, the sound of it filling the old cream-colored walls from the parquet floor to the chandeliers above. Travis stood at the back of the ballroom, both hands resting on the handles of Thomas's wheelchair. He was not applauding. He was completely still, looking at the stage, with the particular expression of a person in the middle of understanding something they cannot yet put into words. He was thinking about what came next, what Travis chose to do in the next 60 seconds. Walking toward that stage with no invitation, no script, and no guarantee of how it would be received, is the moment this entire story has been building toward. He handed Thomas to the volunteer beside him, gently, with a quick word. Then he walked, not fast, not with any drama, just steadily, through the tables, toward the stage steps, while people turned to watch. A journalist reached for her phone. Someone near the front row leaned toward her neighbor and whispered something. Travis climbed the steps. He walked to the center of the stage and stood in front of Eleanor in a Navy volunteer polo and khaki slacks with a laminate badge on a plastic clip. He did not kneel. He did not press his hands together or open his arms or do anything that would make this into something performed. He bowed his head. Slowly, fully, the way a person bows when the words they have are not large enough for what they need to carry. He raised it. His voice was not steady. He used it anyway. I was wrong to judge you by what you were wearing. I was wrong to make you feel small in a room full of people watching. He swallowed. I told that story at my dinner table. I thought it was something worth repeating. He looked at her directly. When I was younger, a man with power decided I wasn't worth his time based on how I looked before I ever opened my mouth. I lost a job I needed. I carried that for a long time. And somewhere along the way I told myself the anger made sense, that I was protecting myself. He exhaled slowly. But I became exactly what I was angry at. I just didn't have the nerve to see it. Eleanor held his gaze. Her expression was open, steady, unhurried. I recently found out, Travis continued, that your foundation covered my brother Danny's surgery 3 years ago.
He was 22. He had no way to pay for it. He pressed his lips together for a moment. I signed the paperwork and thanked whatever program I assumed had sent it and never looked further into it. I didn't know it was you. I never knew it was you. His voice caught on that last sentence. He steadied himself. A person's true worth is not in the clothes they wear when they walk into a room. It is in the way they live, the way they give, and the way they treat others when there is nothing to gain from it. You showed me what that actually looks like in practice. A breath. I had spent so long protecting myself from being underestimated that I forgot it was possible to simply be a decent person. He stood quietly in the silence. And then, from somewhere near the back of the ballroom, a small, high, urgent sound. T-Man! T-Man! Thomas, in his wheelchair at the back of the room, was clapping with the full force of an 8-year-old who has been watching the stage the entire time and has strong opinions about how this moment should be received. His whole chair was vibrating. The volunteer beside him was laughing, in the helpless way people laugh when something breaks into joy at exactly the right moment. The ballroom came apart warmly. 400 people on their feet, the sound of it enormous and genuine, filling the room from the parquet floor to the old cream ceiling and the chandeliers swaying slightly above. Eleanor placed her hand on Travis's shoulder. "Everyone deserves the chance to change," she said. To him, privately, inside all that noise. What matters is whether we're brave enough to choose it, and then to keep choosing it, one day at a time. Julian made a brief announcement once the room had settled. If Travis completed his remaining volunteer commitment and Boston Luxury Motors demonstrated genuine and sustained change in its practices, documented and confirmed, Julian would revisit the fleet contract for the Foundation's transportation program, possibly larger than originally planned. Lucas Bennett was promoted to assistant sales manager, effective immediately. The room applauded again. Lucas looked at the carpet and then at the ceiling and then finally just accepted it, which made the people who knew him smile. Travis shook his hand that evening, firmly, with eye contact. "You tried to warn me," Travis said. "I did," Lucas said. Travis nodded. "I should have listened." Lucas considered this for a moment. "Well," he said, "you're here now." After the gala, life settled back into its rhythms. Eleanor kept wearing her simple clothes to the Foundation every morning. The jeans, the white t-shirts, the silver necklace, because nothing about who she was had ever required updating. Travis kept volunteering every week, then twice a week. He began doing something that nobody had asked him to do, sitting down with new volunteers during orientation and telling them his own story. Not the version he had told at dinner tables, the real one, the wound he had been carrying, the way it had quietly reshaped him into something he wouldn't have recognized at 25. And the 8-year-old boy with a laugh like a fire alarm who had, without trying, started pulling it apart. Thomas still called him T-Man. Some things, once given, simply stay. This story teaches us 3 things worth writing down. Not on a sticky note on the fridge, but in the little spiral notebook you keep by the kitchen chair, the one you actually go back to. First, the people who have been hurt the deepest are standing at a fork in the road every single day. One path makes them harder, the other makes them wiser. Travis walked down the wrong road for years. He found his way back. It is never too late to turn around, but you do have to choose to turn. Second, quiet generosity is not weakness. Eleanor never announced what she had done for Danny. She didn't need the credit. Think of the last time you did something kind and said nothing about it afterward. Held the door, slipped a card under a neighbor's door after her husband passed, brought a casserole, and left before they could thank you. That is not small. That is exactly the kind of thing that holds a community together. Third, and this one is personal. The next time someone makes you feel invisible, remember that Eleanor Bennett walked into that showroom in worn jeans and changed 4,000 children's lives without anyone in that building knowing it. Your worth is not on the surface. It never was. It just takes the right room and enough time to become visible. This story is a work of fiction created for inspirational purposes. Names, characters, organizations, and events are entirely fictional. Any resemblance to real persons or institutions is coincidental.